My son brought me to Hawaii. He thinks I'm impressed.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is John and I'm a filmmaker and photographer from Vancouver Island in Canada. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the two cameras that I've been leaning on the most in my video production, which are the Zcam F6 and the Zcam E2. Both of these cameras serve a really unique purpose for me, and while I've even thought about selling the E2 to buy another camera that can complement the F6, I still think this might be the perfect one-two punch in my current workflow. So I'm going to share with you guys today my last 2 years using the E2, and I've been using the F6 for about a year now. And I've watched a lot of other reviewers talk about these cameras and how they might not be perfect. And while I agree that they're not perfect, no camera can be, I disagree with a lot of the problems that have been coming up, and that comes from not necessarily a YouTuber's perspective, but a working professional that leans on these cameras for 10-12 hour shoots. So I'm going to jump into what makes these cameras perfect for me, even though they still might have a few flaws, but that I can work around. So while I was looking to upgrade to a cinema body after using the FS700 from Sony and the A6500, and knowing that I wanted to get something that could offer me a very good quality codec like ProRes or high frame rates like 4K 120p, I was sick of waiting for the Sony a7S III. And because I was sick of waiting for it and I knew the limitations of the ultra large FS700 and the underpowered 8-bit codec of the A6500, I started doing some research into this company Zcam. Zcam offers a lot of flexibility with their cameras, and the first thing that I noticed when I picked up the E2 is just how small it is. Now, it might not look super small with the top handle on it and my phone as a wireless monitor that I can use, but if you look at it compared to an Osmo, you can see how small this camera is. It does not have a large footprint. Because of that smaller footprint, I knew immediately that I would be able to run this camera on a gimbal, a very wide array of gimbals actually, like the Ronin M, which we currently had, and which I upgraded to the Ronin S2 as soon as it was released. So that was the most important part for me, knowing that I could have a camera that was small and powerful, but offered the flexibility of my Sony FS700. I've put them through their paces on 12-hour shoots, back-to-back shoot days, time lapses all day long. I've done projects that have been high profile with a lot of risk and a lot of stress, and I've had zero issues. Only recently have I upgraded the F6 to a V-mount battery so I can run it for more than the 3 to 4 hours I get on the NPF batteries. Why I chose to go with the Zcam is I trusted the company to be fixing mistakes. Since I've owned these cameras, they've come up with probably 10 to 12 different software updates that have improved the cameras, fixed bugs that have been in the cameras, and given us features that we didn't currently have before. When this was announced, it was a maximum of 120 frames per second. That has now been upped to 160 frames per second as well as in both of the cameras, not just limiting us to an H.265 codec for recording high frame rates. That has recently been updated and fixed to allow us to record ProRes 422 10-bit in any frame rate or resolution in both of the cameras. That kind of commitment to improving a product rather than replacing a product is something that I was very unfamiliar with while I was shooting on Sony products, which instead of getting updated would get replaced sometimes very quickly, or in the case of the Sony a7S III, not quickly enough. The one thing that really surprised me about both of these cameras that I really didn't expect when I was looking to make the purchase into the ecosystem of the Zcams, I really believed that I would be shooting most of my content in ProRes. Now, the limitations of ProRes at the time were a highest frame rate in 4K of around 72 frames per second. That wasn't a deal breaker for me by any standard, but what I found out really quickly is that the H.265 codec, while a little bit more intensive on the CPU to decode, gave me enough flexibility in post and a very desirable file size. Now, instead of going through about 1 terabyte every hour in ProRes, I can shoot for a whole day on 0.5 terabyte or a 1/4 terabyte, which is really exciting for me. Storage is something that I hate to invest in. It's one of my least favorite things to spend money on is hard drives when I know that I have lenses and batteries and different peripherals and microphones and lighting that I prefer to invest my money in because it gives my productions more value. However, you should always prioritize buying storage so you can back up your footage and have redundancies in place. But that's why I've been using a program called Backblaze to back up my footage and then run a RAID 0 for my hard drive. So I get fast speeds, automatic backup that's off-site, so it's safe if there was a fire in my office or anything. That makes me feel a lot better. But like I said, the H.265 codec being flexible, robust, not too hard on my computer to edit, and giving me that amazing file size that I want. One of the things that I've heard a lot of people complain about with the E2 is its low light performance. And while it doesn't have the same performance as the F6 or any other similar full frame sensor camera, it's no slouch there either. I'm gonna show you some clips that I shot with the E2, and I'm gonna show you some clips that I shot with the F6, and then we're gonna compare both of those to a similar shoot that I did with the Sony a7S III. I had known from my research that its best performance was at 12,800 when it was low light. That being said, we were experimenting with some 6400 ISO, 3200 ISO, and 1600 ISO clips. Noise aside, looking at the clips side by side, there are some things with the a7S III that I dislike in its footage, and I think this might come down to not having a very precise shutter angle while you're filming. There's some interesting motion blur happening when it captures the tires spinning on this quad. That's something I haven't seen in any of the Zcam footage that I've encountered, and I think that's because you have a very precise shutter angle setting that automatically switches anytime you change your frame rate. Both these cameras have a very good dynamic range, with the F6 giving a Zcam quoted 15 stops of dynamic range, and the E2 giving me a Zcam quoted around 12. Now, if you go to CineD, they're going to tell you that those values are different, but I still believe that the values are very similar to any of the other cameras using a similar sensor. Like the S1 that I'm shooting this on right now, shares the same sensor as the Zcam F6. So knowing that, I can use my Panasonic and my Zcam as a tandem for 2 full frame cameras in an interview when maybe lighting's a little bit restrictive, or if it's a very high dynamic range environment. But that being said, I don't shy away from using the E2 in high dynamic range scenarios. What I've adjusted my shooting technique with since switching to this Micro Four Thirds system is having to expose to the right. Exposing to the right gives me a higher noise floor in my log curve while I try to retain as much highlight detail as possible. Now, what I've done to make that a little bit easier on me is I've loaded Zcam's -3 exposure lookup tables on my phone or monitors so I can easily view the files 3 stops overexposed while I'm shooting. That means I know that my noise floor is going to be over the 25 to 30 IRE to maintain its noise floor performance. Then I bring those values down in post and I have a very clean image. That doesn't mean that the Zcam E2 can't have bad noise performance. It's very easy to underexpose the image, and when you do underexpose the image, you can run into issues with noise patterns that are a little bit harder to remove in post. With the Zcam F6, it's much easier to basically shoot however you want. You can protect the shadows, you can protect the highlights, and that image is very flexible in post. One other complaint that I've seen from a lot of people is the menu system in the Zcam and using the buttons to navigate. While I can agree that it might be a little bit difficult to get used to, all of the information that you view on the camera is really easy to understand. So if you just spend a little bit of time getting used to the camera's menu system, you really don't have a whole lot of problems with figuring out how to change your resolution, frame rate, file type, codec, whatever it is that you need to affect. Early on, I had a few issues with the E2 when I would maybe miss my white balance. That was really easy when I had a monitor that I was using on the camera that didn't give me the lookup table to properly view the log file. The log file being a little bit flatter than other log profiles that I'm used to looking at. Because of that, I had some really big issues with noise. Granted, I was shooting in ProRes 422 HQ at the time. However, I haven't had that problem with the H.265 clip, and even if I'm slightly off on white balance, I found it much easier to fix those files in post. I think here it's maybe worthwhile to look into the actual resolution and the image fidelity when you punch into your clips. So we're going to dive into some shots from the F6. After a year plus of using both these cameras, I really can say that they are more than enough for me and what I do. And with the inclusion of ProRes RAW in these cameras now, I don't see any reason why they can't continue to grow with me as I grow my company. But I haven't utilized the ProRes RAW features or even ZRAW so much because I'm using DaVinci Resolve. And in DaVinci Resolve, I can't use ProRes RAW natively, so it just makes a little bit of a hurdle for my workflow that I don't really want to have to jump over. We're in this really wonderful time where we can see cameras evolving and camera companies evolving. And one of the things that really makes that decision easier for me when I'm making a big purchase and more than one camera body for a system is, does the company offer lots of improvements in the cameras down the line? When I bought the S1 from Panasonic, I really didn't expect them to give me 6K recording in that because of the S1H. I'm glad now that they've updated that camera and given me more features that rival the more expensive body, because it makes me feel as a consumer that the company cares about the users getting the most out of their products for the longest period of time. I'm excited to see what Zcam does in the future. I think they're a company worth watching, and if you're on the fence about upgrading your current camera or you're buying your first real cinema camera, this is a great start point because the cost of entry versus your quality that you're able to output is so minimal. Anyways guys, I'm really glad that you took the time to watch this video, and I hope that I got my point across about why I think these are important options for anybody at any level in filmmaking. If you want to know more, you can definitely leave a comment down in the comment section, and if you watched this far, I would highly recommend that you subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot as I'm a small channel trying to grow, and if you're local to Western Canada, thanks for joining in, because I know from my own perspective, we don't have a lot of YouTubers out here. So thanks again for watching, and as always guys, stay creative.